Welcome to the first video in a series of Grasshopper tutorials. In this one we're going to start working with the interface and show you the basic commands and where to find the different components and sort of what the components and everything mean. So if you open up Rhinoceros on your computer, version 4 or version 5, they both have Grasshopper loaded, and you type into the command line Grasshopper, it's going to load either as this screen or as a screen asking you to accept default changes or accept the policy agreement. Just go ahead and say OK and then open it up, and what you'll get is this here. So this big space here inside of this drop shadow is what's called the canvas. This is where you build all of your scripts. This is where all of your components will go, and then everything that you build in here you'll be able to see inside the Rhino viewport. So some really basic things about Rhino if you're unfamiliar. The scroll wheel on your mouse will zoom in and out. The right click, if you hold it down in perspective view, will orbit. If you hold down right click in an orthographic view, it will pan. And if you'd like to pan in perspective view, you hold down shift and the right click, and that will give you the pan. What's helpful for me in Grasshopper is making this perspective the whole right side of my screen and making this Grasshopper the whole left side. So what you'll start with in Rhino is this view with all four here. You can double click on one of these to make it full screen, and you can double click on the name again to take it down back to the 4 view. You can also right click here and set view, and you can set any of these views as well. These are just different types, how it's going to preview your geometry. So for the perspective, we're going to leave it in 4, make Grasshopper the whole left side of your screen just by clicking down here in the bottom left hand corner and dragging. And then taking this middle, you'll see the up and down arrow come over when you drag the mouse over top of this middle white line. Grab that, click and drag that all the way to the bottom, so this perspective becomes the whole right side of the screen. And this will give you a lot of space to work with. Okay, so back to the Grasshopper canvas. The way that Grasshopper is organized is different tabs. So each one of these tabs has a different set of components in it, and they continuously add tabs and people add new plugins and things. But these are sort of the base sets that are inherent in Grasshopper when you first open it, when you first download it. So we'll go over these individually in this first tutorial, and we'll just pull down a couple of these aspects. So to start, we have the Params tab, which is basic parameters. Everything in this first geometry tab, which when you click on the dark black bar, it will pull down everything that's inside there to give you full names of what you're looking at in the icon view. So in the geometry and the primitive tab, these are called simple components or container components. So what these do is they contain geometry, and what they're looking for is basically at what they're labeled as. So if you bring down a point command, and to bring something onto the canvas, you find it up here, you have the pull down, you click right on it, and then you see it's attached to my mouse. You'll see a little gray bar and a plus sign. So wherever I click, it's going to drop that point, and then it'll just look like this. So inside of these components is where all of your options are. So to access that, you right click right on the word point or PT, and a couple simple things at the very top. You can rename this, so we'll rename this first point. And you can also click on this little paint bucket to change from an icon view to a named view. I think the text view is more helpful because you can call it whatever you want, and then it will organize your script a little bit more. A couple of the other commands, preview, this is whether or not you want to see the geometry previewed in Rhino. Enabled is whether or not this component is running. So if you disable it, it will disable this component and everything to the right of it in your script. Baking it means taking it from Grasshopper geometry, which is essentially just a preview geometry, and moving it into Rhino, into official Rhino geometry. And runtime warnings, this will just pull up any type of warnings that you have. Wire display, you can change how you have the incoming wires look. Sometimes this is helpful to clean up your script if you want hidden display. it will only show the wire when you click on it, but we'll go over that a little bit later. Reverse, flatten, graph, and simplify we'll go over a little bit later. And then down here in the set one point, set multiple points, and manage point collection is where the most helpful. This is what the geometry actually is containing. So what you can do is either set a point from Grasshopper or set a point from Rhino. So what we're going to do is we're going to set multiple points in Rhino. So let's build it in Rhino first. In that case, we want to come up here to the left side and click where it says point. If you hover over that, it will say point is the left click and the right click is multiple points. You can also type point, you can type PT in the command line, and that will get you your point. So we're going to do multiple points, and let's just click 5 times. So we have 5 separate points, and then hit escape. So you'll see when I highlight these that we have 5 separate small yellow points. And it's also helpful to put those on layers and stuff in Rhino, but we'll go over that a little bit later. So to reference these into Grasshopper, what you want to do is right click on this first point, and then come up here to set multiple points. And then you can highlight all of your points at once, and it's going to draw this blue line just to show you that this is the first point, second, third, fourth, fifth. So if you want a different combination of points, you can click this one first, that one, whichever one you want. And then you'll just right click, and that geometry is all set in here. So once you click this, it should change colors. If it doesn't change colors like it didn't in mine, what you need to do is go up here to solution at the top, pull down the solution on the top bar, come down here to preview settings at the bottom. There's also a little piece here that you can click. This little half yellow, half white ball is preview settings. So right now our normal and our selected preview are the same color. We want our normal to be red, and then when we select it, we want it to be green. So if you just come down here to this little green visualization ball and you just click it and drag it, drop it right onto selected, it'll become dark green. We want it to be able to see through it in case we have surfaces, so if you come down here to the A, this is the alpha channel, so you can just pull it down a little bit to get a transparent ball, and then just hit OK. So now what happens when we click these points, you'll see in the Rhino window that they're going to turn green, and that way we know that that's what we have selected. So from here, what you can do is, if you're interested in where these points are or the exact locations, what is really helpful is called a panel tool. So up here in Params under Special, Special contains all of the most helpful, you could say, or some of the data visualization pieces, some of the easiest components, like the sliders and stuff will be located here in the panel. So the top two, these two, number slider and panel, you'll use in probably every single script that you ever write. So panel, if you click on that, once again, click it here, and you just pull your first point into there, it's going to tell you that you have 5 referenced points. So this is really helpful to display anything that you have located inside of your components. You can plug this into any component, and so that way you can see what your list looks like or what the organization is. To begin this, you can right click and rename this, and we'll just rename it Points Panel. And then just click outside of it. These panels also have what's called stream contents. You can change the font, you can change the color. Let's change ours to, let's say, bluish green. A little brighter. So you can change the color if you'd like it, and you can also set this as the default color. So then if you go grab another panel, it's going to come up as that color. So this is just personal preference. You can also stream contents, and this is going to send out text files, CSV files, data files, XYZ files, database files, or log files. We'll go over this in a couple tutorials in the future, but this is really helpful if you're trying to export a lot of data to Excel, if you want to keep it pretty organized by CSV or TXT files. Just cancel that. Okay, so from here what we're going to do is just draw a polyline in between these just to show you how this works. So what you want to do is, I'm sorry, I didn't specify how you actually connect this. So from each component you have an input and an output, which is what these arrows are pulling off of. Same thing with this one here. input and an output. So to connect these two, which is in Grasshopper, this is the visual part. You want to connect these, and everything you connect it to, it will transfer all the data in here to here. So what you want to do is just pull that input, or pull that output, sorry, and click it into that input of the panel. And in this case, we're going to want a line component or a polyline. So if you go up here to the top, past math, then sets, vector, into curve, there's a couple different things you can do with curve. Primitive is where we want to go now. Oh, I'm sorry, spline is where we want to go now. Primitive contains sort of just your basic lines, circles, arcs, polygons, and we'll get into that in the next tutorial. But spline has what's called an interpolate curve, or a regular curve, or what we're going to use is a polyline. These are all fairly similar. A curve, as you can see, uses these points as weights. So in fact, let's just try all three and we can see which one you like better. So we'll put a curve on here, we'll go back up to spline, we'll put interpolate, and then once again we'll go back up to spline and we'll put polyline. And then what's really helpful to keep your script organized is if you just click and drag over top of all three of these to have these selected, these little commands at the top with looks like a bunch of little lines, a left arrow, right arrow, and a down arrow will come up. So you can hit the little lines to evenly space all three of these, and then hit the center arrow to organize them over top of each other. I find this really helpful to keep everything organized. And you can also, on the same path, you can hit Control G, which will group these, and then again you can change the color of the group. Let's go to orange, red, that is fine. And again, you can set this as your default color, and then you can double click the group if you want a more free-form group, which is kind of cool. These will break off and come back together, or you can click it a third time and get this sort of organized box group. So what we're going to do is just bring these back in closer. Oops. And the benefit of a group is when you click on the group, you can move the whole thing at one time without clicking on the individual. If you click on the individual, it's going to move that. If you click on the group, it's going to move the group. So we'll come in here and organize this. Okay, I'll take this back to the first one. So what we're going to do is just take this output here, and this is all of our points, and each one of these components, you'll see this one, these are more complicated than our first container. These actually manipulate the geometry. So what this is asking in V is for, if you just hover over it with your mouse, it'll tell you that it wants curve, and then V just wants a set of points, so it's asking for curve control points, as it says. And then D is the curve degree. You don't usually ever want to change this unless you really know about curve degrees, and there's anywhere from 1 degree all the way up to 9 degrees, I believe. But 3 is your basic simple curve, so you don't want to change that. And then P is a periodic curve, which is essentially a polyline curve, and this means that it just goes straight and then makes a jolt from every one of your points, which will show in the polyline curve. So this, where it says false, is a Bullion toggle. So for the Bullion toggles, what you do is right click and go down to set Bullion, and then you can either set it to false or true. So this is the scripting. This is if you've done any basic scripting before, you understand Booleans are just true or false, or 1 or 0. And this is whether it's turned on or turned off. So false, it will be turned on, off. True, it will be turned on. We'll talk about this a little bit later. So the same thing with the integral curve, and then your outputs you can also hover over and I'll tell you what you'll get. So this, by putting points into here, you can get a curve, you will get the curve length, and you will get the curve domain, which is the distance between the max and the min values of the curve. So what we're going to do is take this output, plug it into the V input, and I already got an error because, okay, so pulling out of a panel will give you what's called a string. Pulling out of the points component will be points. So what this is referencing is, instead of, if we pull it from the point and put it into V, it's going to give us a curve. What happened with this is it's changing it from actual XYZ coordinates to words that say reference point, and then it's trying to run reference point into there. So we'll just hold this off to the side while we're doing the rest of this. Okay, so what you see here, if I highlight it into green in the Rhino, viewport is it created a curve between all 5 points, and what it did was each of these points becomes a weight. So it's going to make a curve from your start point to your end point, and then it's going to pull it along using these curves. So the benefit of Grasshopper and linking it with Rhino is I can take any of these points and I can move them, and you'll get a different curve every time you move them, any one of them. So it's always linked, which is really nice. Okay, so back in our Grasshopper, also you can rename these, so we can just call this, it's pretty good what it is now, but I'll just call it curve, just to show. If we don't want to see this, which we don't at this time, you want to right click it and click on preview, and it'll turn that curve off in the Rhino geometry. What also is helpful is if you highlight all of them, in the newest Grasshopper you can click the center scroll wheel and it'll come up with this little dialogue, sort of like in Rhino if you hit the center scroll wheel. So we can turn all of them on or all of them off. We can enable all of them, disable all of them, bake all of them. This becomes really helpful. You can also group all of them by selecting them this way. So we'll go over that later. So take the first point and plug it into the interval curve. So you see what this one does is it's creating a spline, but it's creating it directly between those points. So the same thing, I can move them, but they're always going to be through that. So if you preview both of these, you're going to have the interior curve and you're going to have the exterior curve. And these points control both of them. So we'll turn off the first one, turn off the second one, and then what we'll do is plug it into Polyline. So now you can see we have hard edges. So the polyline is just taking a straight line between point 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5. There's no weight to any of these knots, what they're called, these points. It's just a straight line. So what this is just showing you in Grasshopper is you can take the same data, and very simply we created 3 separate curves, turn them all on at one time. You'll see the 3 different curves we got from the same 5 points, and once again they're all linked in the same way. So let's just quickly go over what these tabs at the top mean. So like I said, parameters is containers, which have all the containers. Special is some of the more interesting or more useful components that you'll use frequently. Math, you can do any type of domain functions, any type of multiplication, addition, your simple mathematic functions, or you could write more in depth. You could do long division for your math homework if you really want to. With script, you can write your own C# scripts or VB scripts. You can also put your own expressions in. This becomes helpful if you're doing like expanded depth ratios or some type of calculation that you need to put a longer expression in. Trigonometry, and then some utilities to find the average or the maximum, the minimum, logarithms. You can add the value of pi in. Sets, this is under list is really one of the most important things in Grasshopper. We'll do another tutorial on this where all of these list items, indexes, replace, this is all, what's inside this panel right here is considered a list, and then what's inside here you can activate or manipulate the list. So just real quickly we'll grab the list item and we'll put that here. So this is asking for the base list, the index number, and all these are the index numbers. So this is, Grasshopper starts at 0 and then counts to up from 0. So everything will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Even though there's still 5 numbers in the list. So if we grab a list item and also a list length, and we plug this into both of them, what we're asking for is the 0 index. So we want just this first point. So if we hide these, by middle clicking on your scroll wheel and clicking disable preview for all of them, and then we click on the list item. Sorry, we'll plug this point into both of these. So what you'll see in your Rhino geometry is this point right here is becoming highlighted because we're asking for just the 0 index point. So this is only giving us 1 point. So if you're trying to pick out a number in a list, you can easily do it with the list item function. And what the list length is giving us is just counting how many numbers are in the list. So this becomes helpful if you need to run a Boolean or something a couple of times. You need to run it as many times as you have in your list. You can easily do that. Just organize these over top. Okay. So as you see, one little component can be right now in 6 different things. Alright, so moving over, we have sequence. This is taking out numbers, picking your own pattern for the numbers that you want, creating ranges, sequences of numbers. Sets, you can make your own sets, same thing as lists. Strings works with letters, so we can pick out certain letters in this. We can ask it to find certain letters, sort of like a search engine. And tree is really important because all of Grasshopper, all the data structures work as a tree. So every time you manipulate the data, it becomes a second layer in the tree. So if you highlight over the point, if you go up here to the point panel, you'll see just a 0 here. And if you take this and Control-C, Control-V will also copy it, and it'll stay connected. If you ever want to disconnect one of these, you'll hold Alt. Oops, I'm sorry. Alt. Okay, I was wrong. In Windows, you hold Control, and you'll get this little red arrow. You'll drag it back to where it came from, and it will release all the information that it had inside of it. So we just take this curve and plug it in here.